Ladies and gentlemen, sometimes silence is not rejection. Sometimes it's the sound of someone wrestling with emotions they're not ready to face. We've all been taught that if someone cares, they'll show up consistently. And yes, that's true most of the time. But there's another side to the story, one we rarely talk about. There are moments when a man pulls away, not because he doesn't feel for you, but because he feels too much. When he meets you, and you stir something deep in him, something real, it shakes his sense of control. He thought he knew what he wanted, who he was, and how to protect his heart. And then you walked in, and suddenly the rules he lived by no longer apply. For some men, deep emotions are uncomfortable territory. Maybe he's been hurt before. Maybe he promised himself he'd never feel that vulnerable again. So instead of leaning in, he leans back, because distance feels safer than the risk of falling. But here's the truth: his silence is about him, not you. It's his battle between fear and desire, between safety and surrender. The worst thing you can do in this moment is take it personally and chase after his clarity. When a man begins to distance himself despite showing interest earlier, it's easy to assume he's simply losing attraction or that he's playing games. But in many cases, the truth is far more complicated. Emotional conflict is a reality for countless men, even those who genuinely like the woman they're seeing. This conflict arises when what they feel is at odds with what they believe they should feel, or when their emotions clash with their personal fears and life circumstances. Attraction can be thrilling, but it can also be destabilizing, especially for someone who's spent years building emotional walls. For some men, feelings grow gradually and in a way they can manage, but there are moments when those feelings hit with unexpected intensity, so suddenly that it feels like losing control. Imagine a man who's been confident, logical, and steady in his life. Then he meets someone who sparks a deep emotional connection he wasn't planning for. That connection might awaken parts of him he thought were long gone or didn't even exist. Desires for intimacy, dreams of a future, a sense of belonging. It should be beautiful, but instead, it can feel threatening to the safety of his carefully managed emotional world. This is because intense feelings demand vulnerability. They invite openness. They require lowering defenses that have been in place for years. And for many men, that's not an easy step to take. Some have been conditioned to believe that emotions are dangerous, that they make you weak, or that letting someone in will inevitably lead to pain. Others have lived through situations that proved those fears right. Heartbreaks, betrayals, disappointments that taught them the safest route is to keep people at arm's length. So when a woman appears who makes them feel deeply, the instinct isn't always to move closer. Sometimes it's to step back and regain control. This internal tug of war is exhausting. On one side, there's genuine attraction, admiration, and the desire to be close. On the other, there's fear of what that closeness might cost. These men often find themselves thinking about her constantly, feeling drawn to her energy, but simultaneously creating distance as a way to manage those feelings. It's not that they don't want her in their life, it's that the depth of the feelings she evokes forces them to confront parts of themselves they've been avoiding for years. The signs of this conflict can be subtle. One day, he's engaged, attentive, and deeply present. The next, he's harder to reach, less responsive, or emotionally muted. This inconsistency isn't necessarily a sign of manipulation. It's often a reflection of the push and pull happening inside him. He might be trying to slow things down so he can process what's happening, to avoid making decisions based purely on emotion. Unfortunately, from the outside, this can look like mixed signals, disinterest or avoidance. What's important to understand is that emotional conflict in men doesn't automatically mean the relationship is doomed. Many men eventually work through this stage, especially when they feel safe enough to do so. The challenge lies in the fact that while they are wrestling with these feelings, they may not communicate openly about the struggle. Some fear that admitting the depth of their emotions will make them appear vulnerable, while others worry it will raise expectations they're not ready to meet. In these moments, it's natural for the woman to wonder if she's done something wrong, to feel insecure, or to question his intentions. But the reality is that his internal struggle is often less about her actions and more about his own readiness to embrace emotional intimacy. The attraction is there. The desire is there. What's missing is his comfort with what those feelings mean for him and whether he's prepared to act on them. When a man is caught in this state of emotional conflict, his behavior can appear contradictory. He might plan a romantic date one week and cancel plans the next. He could open up deeply in conversation, then retreat into a quieter, more distant version of himself. This isn't because his feelings have vanished. It's because he's trying to find a way to keep those feelings from overwhelming him. Understanding this dynamic requires empathy, but it also demands self-respect. It's one thing to recognize that someone is fighting their own emotional battle. It's another to put your own needs on hold indefinitely while they work through it. The presence of emotional conflict doesn't excuse neglect or emotional unavailability. It simply explains why someone might act in a way that seems inconsistent with the feelings they've shown. In truth, men experiencing this internal struggle are navigating a collision between their heart and their head. Their heart is pulling them toward connection, while their head warns them of the risks. Sometimes that warning is loud enough to keep them from moving forward. Other times, they manage to reconcile those fears with their desire, and they choose to lean in rather than pull away. But in the period between those two outcomes, their behavior can feel like a confusing blend of closeness and distance, affection and withdrawal. Fear of vulnerability is one of the most common yet least discussed reasons why a man might hold back, even when he genuinely cares. For many men, opening up emotionally doesn't feel natural. It feels like stepping into dangerous territory. Vulnerability means letting someone see the parts of themselves they usually keep hidden. The fears, the insecurities, the old wounds they've worked so hard to bury. It's not just about sharing feelings, it's about lowering the guard they've built to survive. And for some, that guard has been in place for years, even decades. From a young age, many men are taught, directly or indirectly, that emotions should be controlled, not expressed. They learn that strength is measured by how little they reveal, and that showing too much emotion might be interpreted as weakness. Even in adulthood, this conditioning can be deeply ingrained. So when they meet someone who sparks genuine feelings, it doesn't just bring excitement, it can also trigger discomfort. They're suddenly faced with the possibility of being fully seen, flaws and all, and that can be terrifying. The fear isn't always about the other person. It's often about the mirror that vulnerability holds up. To be open with someone else, they first have to face themselves. This might mean confronting unresolved pain from past relationships, admitting to insecurities they've avoided, or acknowledging fears about the future. For someone used to controlling the narrative of who they are, this loss of control can feel unbearable. Past experiences also play a major role. If a man has been betrayed, abandoned, or deeply hurt before, those memories don't just vanish. They live quietly in the background, shaping how much he's willing to risk again. Even when he meets someone who feels different, someone who feels safe, those old scars whisper warnings. Be careful, don't get too close. Remember what happened last time. This is why vulnerability can feel like both a longing and a threat. On one hand, there's the desire to connect deeply. On the other, there's the instinct to protect himself from possible harm. The struggle is that vulnerability is the very thing that deep love requires. Without it, relationships remain surface level, safe but lacking the intimacy that makes them truly fulfilling. And yet, stepping into that space of openness means accepting uncertainty. When you're vulnerable, you risk rejection, misunderstanding, or even heartbreak. For many men, those risks feel heavier than the potential reward, especially if they've convinced themselves that they're fine without deep emotional connection. Fear of vulnerability often shows up in subtle behaviors. He might keep conversations light, avoiding deeper topics that could reveal too much. He might show affection in actions rather than words, thinking that if he never says how much he cares, It will hurt less if things fall apart. He may also create emotional distance right when things start to feel serious, believing that pulling back will keep him in control of the pace and intensity of the relationship. Sometimes this fear creates a frustrating push-pull dynamic. He'll move closer when he feels safe, then retreat the moment he senses the possibility of emotional risk. From the outside, this can look like mixed signals, but from his perspective, it's self-preservation. He's trying to enjoy the connection while keeping enough distance to protect himself. The irony, of course, is that this very behavior can undermine the trust and safety needed to make vulnerability feel possible in the first place. It's not that he doesn't want to be vulnerable, it's that he doesn't yet trust that it's safe. Trust isn't built overnight, and it's not just about trusting the other person, it's also about trusting himself to handle whatever comes. Vulnerability requires resilience. It means being willing to experience discomfort, to sit with uncertainty, and to believe that even if things don't work out, he'll be okay. For a man who's been taught to equate vulnerability with weakness, making that leap can feel almost impossible without a profound internal shift. In relationships, this fear can be misunderstood as disinterest or emotional coldness, but in reality, it's often the opposite. Sometimes the stronger the feelings, the greater the fear of expressing them, because when the stakes feel high, so does the potential pain. This is why some men are more open with people they're only mildly interested in. They don't feel as much to lose. But with someone who truly matters, the fear of vulnerability can become more intense, leading to hesitation, withdrawal, or guarded behavior. Overcoming this fear is deeply personal. It often requires unlearning years of conditioning, healing old wounds, and developing a new relationship with emotions. But until that happens, a man may find himself in a constant battle between wanting to be close and wanting to be safe. And in that battle, safety often wins, even if it costs him the connection he secretly desires. Past experiences have a powerful influence on how someone approaches love and relationships, often in ways they themselves may not fully understand. For a man who seems to be holding back or behaving inconsistently, those past experiences can be the silent force guiding his actions. Every heartbreak, betrayal, disappointment, or even unfulfilled relationship shapes the lens through which he sees new connections. It's not just about memories, it's about the emotional patterns those experiences created and the lessons, both healthy and unhealthy, he took away from them. If he's been deeply hurt before, it's natural for him to become cautious, even when he meets someone who feels entirely different from anyone in his past. Pain leaves an imprint, and for many people, that imprint whispers constant reminders not to repeat the same mistakes. This is why someone who appears confident and composed can still hesitate when emotions start to deepen. Their mind may be telling them they've found something good, but their emotional memory warns them not to get too comfortable. Sometimes the past doesn't just make someone cautious, it actively rewrites their approach to relationships. A man who once gave his all and ended up rejected might adopt a never again mindset, deciding that keeping a safe distance is better than risking another emotional collapse. Even small disappointments in the past can accumulate into a mindset where hope is tempered with doubt and affection is filtered through a layer of self-protection. The influence of past experiences isn't always about heartbreak either. Sometimes it's about what someone never had. If he grew up without seeing healthy emotional connection, perhaps in a family where affection was rare, arguments were frequent, or love was conditional, he might struggle to believe in lasting intimacy. For him, deep emotional bonds might feel unfamiliar or even unsafe. That unfamiliarity can cause hesitation even when part of him wants to dive in. When a man has a history of relationships that ended badly, trust becomes harder to build. It's not just trust in another person, it's trust in his own judgment. He might question whether he can truly recognize someone's intentions or whether he's blind to warning signs. In this state of mind, even genuine kindness and affection can be met with suspicion. He might wonder, what if this is too good to be true? And instead of embracing what he has, he begins looking for potential cracks before they even appear. These past experiences also shape the emotional pace at which someone moves. If a man has been in a relationship where he felt rushed, pressured, or blindsided, he might slow things down intentionally. That slower pace isn't necessarily about a lack of feelings, it's often about wanting to be sure. Unfortunately, from the outside, this can be mistaken for disinterest. In reality, it's an internal strategy for preventing the pain he once felt. The tricky part is that past experiences often live in the subconscious. He may not wake up each morning thinking about an ex or a painful moment, but the emotional residue is still there, influencing his reactions. For example, if he was cheated on, he might become hyper aware of signs of disloyalty. If he was abandoned without explanation, he might become overly alert to shifts in tone or attention. These reflexes aren't a reflection of the new person's behavior, they're echoes of what came before. When past pain goes unhealed, it tends to resurface at the most inconvenient moments. A small disagreement can feel like the start of the end. A missed call can trigger feelings of being ignored or unwanted. A deepening emotional bond can suddenly feel like a trap rather than a gift. This is why even someone who seems deeply interested might create distance right when things feel most promising. The past doesn't just shape fears, it can also shape beliefs about what love is supposed to look like. If he's been in relationships full of drama, unpredictability, or emotional highs and lows, healthy love might feel strangely calm, even boring, at first. That mismatch between what he's used to and what he's experiencing can cause confusion, making him wonder if something is missing when in fact, it's just different. Past experiences act like an invisible filter over every interaction. They influence how much he's willing to share, how quickly he opens up, and how deeply he's willing to let someone in. Without awareness, these old patterns can keep